detonation. We don't have our guest that we were going to have, which was the farmer and the guy involved in the white South African crisis. That's because he's hard to contact. We wish him all the best. We hope that nothing has befallen him and his family. He is under pressure, so we hope that nothing's happened to him. And in the meantime, we have a presidential primary candidate from the United States, Jonathan BenZion. He's a very interesting man. He's candidate number one of our three-part candidate series, and we'll be bringing him on in a sec. But first, we'll run to our quick news item, because we always do a news item before the show. So today in the news, Iran is ramping up uranium enrichment. So the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards says the world knows Tehran is not, was following the nuclear deal, basically, the JCPOA set out. We're going to bring BenZion for his reaction. Ben, you could be the president in the future. Ben, what do you think? What would you do with the Iran scenario if you were handed became the president of the United States? What would you do with Iran?
Excellent. Thank you, Steele. Yes, if I were the president in January 2021, my platform, the Futurist New Deal, is largely a reform platform, and it's largely focusing on advancing a particular set of e-governance and economic relief. It's an economic reform ticket, primarily focusing on a $52,000 basic income funded through federal land leases. A lot of these are held by the federal government in the United States. But foreign policy is a very serious matter, and I would probably tend to be perhaps what would be regarded as a bit of an isolationist. I think that the United States spends an obscene amount of money on being sort of the world police, and this is something that has had affected the sort of law of unintended consequences. Iran is not a problem that just cropped up within the last 10 or 15 years. It goes back to the relationship between the UK and the United States in cooperating to protect the British Petroleum effectively from having their oil reserves nationalized, overthrowing the Shah. And in turn, this was the beginning of a domino effect of destabilization on the part of the Western world and the United States, most specifically, that is left in many ways the entirety of the Middle East to be a place that would be not as a desirable place to live as it would have been had the United States had a more isolationist view. Israel, which is, in my view, effectively a client state, the government is effectively a client state, lovely people there, but the government itself is effectively a client state of the Pentagon, but they have 200 nuclear weapons. We're not going to invade them. This notion of invading Iran is, to my mind, a little bit of a charade. My feeling would be that we need to step back from these conflicts, step back from building up these military bases around the world, and most importantly, reduce these trillions and trillions of dollars of Pentagon bloat, money that's just being flushed down the toilet, and use those resources to restore our struggling middle class in the United States.
So just before we go into longer lifespans and reforming the middle class, I put you on the spot there. You survived. You survived the fire there. So who are you, Ben, and BenZion? Who are you, and what got you involved with up to where you are now?
Yes. Well, I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm also the chair of the recently formed Arizona Transhumanist Party, And we have a similar set of charter documents in some ways. We're still reviewing ours to the United States Transhumanist Party. And I've been working closely with the Transhumanist Party for a little while now. And I was just asked this earlier today by Alex from the MIT Technology Review about my role in those charter documents. There were a few issues that were sent out to all members that I did vote on, but I wasn't actually one of the architects of that. But I have been involved with this party and this movement for quite some time. And yes, I am pleased that I've been able to put together this great team in advancing the Futurist New Deal. We have it's really in naming a thing, sometimes it brings it to life, and I think that the Futurist New Deal is no exception. There we have had great success in reaching out to people. As you know, techno-optimists, transhumanists are a pretty diverse group. They tend to be unified by ideas like longer lifespans for human beings, and not everyone in the reform, not every reform-minded person in the United States necessarily familiar with the concepts of a longevity, escape velocity, or super longevity. So it's part of the reason that we've, although not the main reason, but part of the reason that we've focused the Futurist New Deal on these reform issues is to be able to build bridges to a society that is able to discuss and implement these emerging technologies and emerging biomedicine that will allow people to be living longer lifespans and having public health goals achieved. It's very true to say that we have the hard work of super longevity is being done by researchers, but our society maybe is not equipped from a policy standpoint or from a socio-political standpoint to best make use of these technological breakthroughs. And so that building those bridges is what we're trying to do with the Futurist New Deal. And I feel that a lot of inroads are being made there.
Yeah, that's captivating. So I can hear you really want to spruce the Futurist New Deal. So let's go through it so we lay the foundations out so everyone understands what you're talking about. We have a lot of health experts who watch this show, politicians and incredibly smart people. Just explain, just before we go into the Futurist New Deal, this idea of escape velocity, longevity escape velocity. What is that? What does it mean? And why are people divided on that issue?
Yes. Well, I don't think it's a particularly divisive issue in itself, but it's an unproven issue, and there are some potential concerns there. But yes, to describe longevity escape velocity, we have to allow for the possibility that many breakthroughs are being made right now in the lab and in human trials, which are contributing to the prospect of ending cell death in human beings and ending these other marches towards senescence that we all must face throughout the course of our lives. But that is increasingly less the case. And so with every passing year, we are moving closer to a point in history where human beings may be able to have a long enough life expectancy to survive until the next intervention, the next preventative measure that would allow them a healthier, to remain healthy and to live longer. Until such time as we are basically able to fix our organs and reverse neurodegenerative conditions to such a degree that I like to use the term universal longevity escape velocity, because it's not enough that just Bill Gates or Peter Thiel or a certain select few people are able to make use of these emerging biomedicine. It should be something that we plan for in terms of our public health services. It should be something that we really reach for in every society, in every country's public policy making and agendas.
Aubrey de Grey, Peter Thiel, and Ray Kurzweil
Yes.
have all brought their projections forward, their dates forward from 2045 forward. Can you explain? Is that because technology is accelerating, or is that because the psychology of people is changing, or both, or is there a convergence?
Sorry. There's a couple of things that we could say about that. Most techno-optimists are familiar with the concept of Moore's law and exponential growth in technology. There's actually quite a few different curves there, and in some regards, Moore's law, which refers specifically to microchips, has kind of leveled off a little bit. It's not growing as fast. We've reached the micro scale of engineering where there's not a whole lot more space on those chips to keep doubling capacity every 18 months. But in the life sciences, breakthroughs have been made that are allowing for this escape velocity to be met. Where things like CRISPR increasingly being able to leverage network technologies and advanced algorithms, and more people doing this work into these cures. Just within the last 6 months, there have been patients who have been cured of HIV, and there's all manner of things of this kind. My mother is a type 1 diabetic, and she has been a type 1 diabetic for her entire adult life. She's taking very good care of herself. And over the course of these 4 decades, she has used newer and newer iterations of these, what is now basically an artificial pancreas. That's the prototypes that are coming to market now, and we've seen a similar trajectory in the use of artificial organs and replacement organs to a lesser degree, but in various different body parts. And we are moving into this time in history where we are going to be able to replace these things and maintain our health at a relatively youthful state, and I would say argue not in perpetuity, but for quite a long time compared to the present human lifespans. And Ray Kurzweil is perhaps known as the father of contemporary transhumanism. He's a person who is very optimistic about these things. So if he is moving his numbers closer in our timeline, that is something perhaps to reflect upon, that some breakthroughs are being made there. Aubrey de Grey, a person who's done an incredible amount of work in this field, is also moving those numbers closer to us. George Church, a great Harvard geneticist, perhaps one of the most accomplished living scientists, has tended to agree with these revised figures. So it's largely a question of how we make use of these things as they become available. Do we incorporate them into the public health service agendas? Do we have these preventative measures become legislated for and advanced forward? The vice chair of the Arizona Transhumanist Party and other members of the Transhumanist Party and I are working on what's called in the United States a health savings account platform. The United States has perhaps in some way a less robust public health service than Australia, sadly. We have some holes in our public health service. Not everyone is covered in the same way. And this leads to roughly 35,000 people a year dying because of inadequate healthcare. And many people in the United States favor changing this, and as do I. It's part of the Futurist New Deal platform. But this health savings account would be something that would allow techno-optimists particularly to start utilizing some of these public funds towards life extension preventions and interventions, the kind that would be suitable. Not talking necessarily about cryonics, but things that would actually contribute to longer lifespans specifically. And we also are founding a legal fund that would be advocating for the same thing. And the same thing could be done in other countries. Legal funds could be used to advance these specific prevention agendas within the National Health Service. This would save money. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we want to get people to start thinking in this way and conceptualizing these agencies in this way.
That's very good. So yeah, I like it how you use the term universalist escape velocity. That the cost is going down, the distribution, the manufacture becomes easier, and these become more widely spread over time. That's very good. So let's go on with the Futurist New Deal. Let's go through it step by step, because I really want to go through this with you, because you've got some fascinating points here. So the first point is a blockchain-secured e-voting system mandated in every state. I like that at least someone on the planet, and it's usually the transhumanists and money, financial people, they understand there's a difference between blockchain and Bitcoin. It's a very hard concept for all these other people to understand. But you're all good on this one. So blockchain-secured e-voting mandated in every state. I get it. You get it. But explain to the audience what that means.
Yeah, and I spoke to your countryman, a gentleman named Max Kay, who's the founder of the Flux Australia Party, and we, not the Transhumanist Party formally, but my campaign has formalized some dealings with Flux USA, and we are very sympathetic to Flux Australia and Flux International. But this is an organization that I would describe as post-partisan, an organization that's effectively trying to move past a party system by creating direct democracy and full voter participation, and doing so by advancing these blockchain voting systems and networked e-governance prospects. And this is not purely a speculative idea. This is an entire country, Estonia, has this kind of system. They have an i-voting system where all of their citizens are able to vote through their devices. They also have national ID cards for everyone that are chipped, and that allows for a lot more engagement with these government services through these portals, besides merely voting. This is what every country should be moving toward. And there are some barriers to entry here. Political systems and entrenched power and lobbies in the United States, they resist this sort of thing because they are able to micromanage in a pretty unhealthy way the present systems. You know, the United States is outside watchdogs outside of the United States are looking at the United States and saying, this is not actually a democracy anymore because of these oligarchic forces. You know, we have entire states that have where voter suppression is epidemic, and an entire party in the United States, the Republican Party, that basically campaigns on voter suppression in a variety of ways, and there's all kinds of double talk and dirty tricks therein. But So there's certain kinds of forces that are preventing this, I believe, in not only in the United States but perhaps in other countries. But it is very feasible. Max Kay was talking about how he could run the system on one machine. Now the protocols required, the software required is another matter. That's something that would need to be developed and tailored to specific uses. But the fact that he could manage the system from his MacBook for the entirety of Australia, I think it definitely speaks to the viability of this. People in the United States, they like to refer to going back to paper ballots, which it is a reasonable thing to refer to as a stopgap, given the troubles that the United States has had. But paper ballots have the same history of manipulation on the part of party bosses, and they don't build in the kind of transparency and metadata and cooperative efforts that a blockchain system would. And to my mind, it's a little bit like a farmer in 1900 insisting upon using horses to plow their fields instead of tractors, just rather than embracing the changes and improvements of this new technology.
So your next point here is data and Wi-Fi for all is a public good and a human right. Now that's very interesting. We had Peter Zing on. We were talking about the Uplink program, Elon Musk, where they're trying to get Wi-Fi throughout the Earth. In that context, is that relevant? And explain your policy on
that. Yes. So I would say that of many of these issues, a national platform in the BenZion presidency, the Futurist New Deal as implemented in January 2021, this might tend to be as much a private-public partnership as any, because as you said, Elon Musk is basically built up this infrastructure and could implement something like this with the correct support from administration. There's a lot of companies, and I would argue that those companies, a handful of companies who have local monopolies over data in the United States, and I would argue that some of those companies are keeping prices artificially high, and they're doing this to the detriment of citizens. Making data available as a public good is something that improves local economies and quality of life to a dramatic degree. And the system that we have now, which is allowing monopolists to maintain artificially high prices, it is doing so to the detriment of these economic improvements in the real economy.
I'm trying not to comment too much for the viewers because we have a little bit of an echo issue, but I just want to say, like, there's probably AT&T and Verizon and Vodafone which have a big sort of monopoly in that. And why is it a human right? Why is data a human right? Isn't data a choice? Why is it a human right?
Yes. Well, at a certain point, it might become a question of semantics to regard access to information as a civil right. But we have seen in the network world a significant in the network world of the last 20 years, a significant uptick in people's ability to participate in political conversations. To be able to create grassroots campaigns that affect policy agendas, and just general political literacy. The conversation has shifted. I believe the reason that the United States is now a more reform-minded culture than it was 20 years ago is because of this connectivity. And people are maybe pointing to some downsides to that. I think that those are largely describing transactional issues that they are irritated by, rather than serious socio-political concerns. But the point is that a society thrives under these conditions, and to the effect that we are allowing this, what I would describe as a sort of oligarchic system in the United States, to turn the faucet down on the amount of data that people are receiving by keeping prices artificially high, by other things that are not pure market forces, that are the result of result of policy. This is hurting. This is hurting people, in effect, and it's fair to say that that shouldn't be in the same class as maybe other utilities in terms of them being regarded as a free good or a public good. But I do think it is fair to say that this is an important issue. It's certainly an important issue for techno-optimists. As we're moving into an increasingly a world of Internet of Things, this may be doubly true, that we want to facilitate access to that data to continue to grow new businesses and to continue to grow healthful environments.
Yeah, because people mostly associate water and food and shelter and other things like that as a human right, because it has an impact on your physical body and your physical well-being, which I'll talk more about with the next candidate, his 222 plan. I don't want to spruce him on this show, but it seems to be in the physical domain, and this is saying no, this is a step further, expanding the definition of utility. So this is something that's going to interest a lot of the people who are investors and entrepreneurs who frequent this channel. Enhance e-government services and e-portals for people and businesses. What's that all about?
I would like to say one other thing about this data notion, which is that I would definitely support, first and foremost, an economic Bill of Rights in the United States, and this notion the world around, as a legislative agenda. So I would not place access to data higher than an economic Bill of Rights. And in campaigning, I've been focusing on our middle class, $52,000 a year basic income, much more than this data issue. But I think we can put order of importance numbers on all of these. Yes, access to e-governance. This is the continuation of what happens in a blockchain system if the United States would implement, similar to what is occurring with iVoting in Estonia, and that involves getting everyone effectively a new Social Security card that would be a national ID that has a chip in it, that they're able to and that they're able to access government services on this basis from their devices. This is an important step. We don't just in the last few years, the United States has been giving people less access to these kind of services, and less funding to programs of this kind in general. We should not be moving in the wrong direction. We do not want to be on the wrong side of history. We want to be embracing new emerging technologies and utilizing them in the most robust way that we can. And that would
while you're on E, can you just talk about your school project as well, your K-12?
Yes. So I was a curriculum developer for a while, working with international students, language departments, and worked for a few different schools in this area. I have a background as an educator. So this is an area that's pretty close to my heart. And the United States, it's an ongoing controversy in the United States. The United States has privatized a lot of schools. And studies are revealing that these charter schools and privatized programs are big money pits. They're throwing money in a hole, and it's not being used as well. And that is an issue. We don't want to continue that trend. And just within the last few days, the governor of Florida has signed more charter schools into existence, despite knowing this. And this is again because there are powerful people. The Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, is basically a school privatization czar. She's the 20th richest woman in the world, and she's so there are powerful forces in the United States which would see this a dysfunctional system imposed upon the rest of us, despite the fact that it's quite unpopular. So we don't want to see problems like this continuing, but we do want the existing public schools and public infrastructure to be making the best use of data and connectivity that they can. We want to give people other options. You know, growing up as a young person in middle school, I had a difficult time. I would have liked to have had some options in terms of being able to continue my studies in a sort of telepresence. And I think, and many schools do this, and in doing so, they are just giving a lot more choice to people, allowing them to maybe focus on projects rather than pump and dump style studying, which is itself a type of system that seems to work very well, you know, across Central Europe and Scandinavia. These kind of educational outcomes are focused on, and students are learning more quickly and more dynamically as a result.
So, can you please explain to us your crude oil and your decriminalization of drugs, or your drug policy? We'll knock those two over, and then because I want to focus with you a lot of time on the UBI.
Yes. So the United States has a few famous New Deals. Many of your viewers probably maybe heard some of these terms before. Probably people are fairly familiar with them. So the original New Deal was implemented in 1935, as it was a time of the Great Depression. And at this time, there was rampant unemployment and unstable markets. There was a Wall Street crash of 1929. And all of these things resulting in a situation where people were having a hard time. They were standing in bread lines. They were losing their property and so forth. And so the New Deal was a program that implemented any number of jobs programs and stopgaps, as well as the system which has since been adopted throughout the developed world, something like Social Security in the United States. This is a direct result of the New Deal, and the result of that was that people were able to retire after they had finished their working life. And this is a great accomplishment. This system is one to be admired, and I think in some ways it was ahead of its time in 1935. But it's not a complete system, and we can contrast that. I bring this up in contrast to the more recent Green New Deal, which has some similar objectives to the one that we've described. We want to, like the Green New Deal, the Futurist New Deal, we want to end this artificial propping up of fossil fuel-based markets. And this is a huge amount of money that's being spent subsidizing these archaic markets, rather than leveling the playing field or even promoting more green technologies. And that's something that we need to do. The United States is the only country in the world that has a major climate denial party in the Republican Party. And that's an unfortunate reality that people in the United States have to deal with, this anti-science sentiment and this anti-science influence in our government. But we cannot afford as a society on the world stage or in the United States to continue with this know-nothing attitude. We have to put a stop to these polluting things that are contributing to the climate crisis. And the best way to do that is to legislate for these things by ending these subsidies and effectively diminishing the tremendous influence that these lobbies have on our government. The other point about decriminalization is one worth making. It's also one that it's a conversation that's being had also across the world over. People are moving towards the decriminalization of soft drugs, to the full legalization of many of those same soft drugs, and towards for these more pernicious types of drugs, decriminalization with a mind to treatment, with a mind to ending the street culture and cycles of entrapment and poverty that put people into these difficult circumstances, and focusing rather on just in the way that our UBI would function in a similar way to get people out of these poverty traps. We want to do that for people who are suffering under substance abuse. And the best way to do that is decriminalization of all substances. But it should be noted that we do not have the full legalization of all of these illicit substances, only of soft drugs like marijuana, which is a situation that's well underway in many countries, including the United States.
Yeah, it's already well underway in Colorado and Canada and other places. So we'll go into this middle class, because this is where you really want to focus. You're huge on the UBI. You're a little different to Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang has one idea. You have another. You have a big idea on how to fund this UBI through federal land leases, and we'll talk about that. As far as I understand it, in the 40s and 50s and a little earlier, the federal government has decided to just national park everything in order to gobble up land, because prior to that, the colonization period, they were giving the land away as quick as they could, because they wanted population and they wanted to expand the territory after they freed themselves from Britain, which was doing deals with Native Americans and doing land deals. And after, well, the Louisiana Purchase was another big one, which Napoleon couldn't hold on to. So then they realized, oh, we've given away a lot of this land. Let's put it in national parks and lock it up. And now we've hit a point where you're saying what? You're saying let's start. So where is the middle class? It's in decline, obviously. It's an empire. You're living in the middle of an empire, and the empire is fighting on multiple fronts. You've got multiple wars going on all over the world. You're the policeman of the world, and it's sucking the middle class dry. I thank you for your assistance, like you're keeping us safe, but it's not, it's not. Some of it doesn't benefit you. Some of it is benevolent. It's just trade for trade's sake. So, where is the middle class? Where are they heading? And then how do you fix that? And why are you different from Andrew Yang?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Andrew Yang is a presidential candidate from the Democratic Party, and he is also running on a UBI. And he's made incredible strides, gone from a very much a dark horse candidate to one who was in the recent Democratic Party debate, and has been advancing UBI to an incredible degree. People will point to concerns about the funding of his UBI. Fiscal conservatives will point to this idea that it could contribute to some hyperinflation effect, and I would tend to disagree with that. If we look at the financial crisis of 2009, we had a quantitative easing program wherein something like $11 trillion was basically just removed from the system, in a word, and that did not trigger any hyperinflation or negative effects. We have a very fintech, financial technology-driven economy now. That's where we're sort of able to control and predict these things in a way that wasn't possible in previous decades. The Futurist New Deal and its middle class basic income is supported by these land leases, and that is a separate revenue stream that would not trigger these same kinds of concerns in the same way, even if you agree that those concerns are basically concern trolling on the part of people who just don't want to help struggling people, in my view. But we should talk about what you said about the history of these federal lands. So going back to the turn of the century of 1900s, a gentleman named Teddy Roosevelt started nationalizing a lot of these lands, and that continued, as you said, throughout the 20th century. This program is not an attempt to undermine the natural beauty of these parks or these resources, and in fact, that is why it is a lease program. These would those leasing these lands, these businesses, they would have to agree to a very strict set of stipulations, including being completely carbon neutral, building their operations in a way that is extremely clean, and also equally important, I believe, is agreeing to aesthetic considerations where they would not be building out the area entirely. They would not be a blight on these federal lands. So we wouldn't be making Yellowstone and Yosemite. The character of these places would not be changed. We would be focusing on less controversial federal land lease holdings and developing those. And it would be, again, a program that would not be selling land, selling off all of the land, or selling off any of the land. It would be leasing these properties in a responsible way.
So, do you have a secret land tax hidden within this? Because this is what it sounds like. It sounds like you want to expand the land tax. Like even if you don't raise land tax on the rentier class, which is kind of what you sound like you want to do. But even if you don't raise that tax, you're increasing the number of inputs into that. So I'm not sure what land tax is in America already. I'm assuming it's not going to be not that high. Not for large lots of lands. Well, why would they? But I don't know. You know about this. Are you trying to expand the inputs, or what about just raising current tax levels?
Yes. So property taxes in the United States is it's an area that might affect people in different regions to different degrees. Some people might find that their property taxes are quite high, and that they are paying quite a lot of money to effectively fund a school system which they are not participating in, or things of this kind. Our program is actually eliminating property taxes on civilians who hold properties that are valued at less than $1 million. So we would continue to take property taxes from organizations and corporations and businesses, but not from individuals who have ordinary homes valued under $1 million, and it would be a tiered system beyond that. So we're not looking to implement a new land tax on existing landholders. This lease program is simply a way to make use of these vast holdings of the United States to create, at the very least, a stopgap program that would allow us to provide a basic income and to start to prepare for this a world that we're moving into of full automation and a sort of a potential jobless society. Allow us to adjust to this. All of these people who would be drawing, every adult would be drawing this $52,000 minimum income. For some families, that might be, that would represent possibly $150,000 a year, or more or less, depending on the configuration of the family. This would allow people to start the kinds of businesses that they wanted, the sole proprietorships, the partnerships, more cooperative forms, or simply give them the leeway to pursue another job that they would find a lot more gratifying that they haven't been able to pursue because they're stuck in work that they find to be a little thankless. This program, this federal land lease program, would represent $173 trillion in the United States over a period of 10 years. So we would, in January 2021, in the BenZion presidency, we would be able to have these contracts in place and be able to pre-fund this system, and already being able to see those benefits for people. The United States has hundreds of thousands of people living on the streets through no fault of their own, through poor economic policy, through living in a somewhat heartless society that can't be bothered to legislate to strengthen its middle class. We want to change that, and we want to recognize that these are that they're not, these people are not just human beings. They're people who, in a slightly better iteration of our world, would be contributing in ways that they're not able to contribute. And even if that is just what Andrew Yang refers to as the real economy, rather than these markets, having closer dealings with their family, taking care of children, doing these things. In all of these UBI studies, they found that 1% of people leave the workforce. Most of these people are starting businesses, finding new work that they like a lot more. But those 1% of people who are leaving the workforce, they're people that have children, and they want to take care of their children. They want to spend time with them. You cannot fault people for wanting to do this. We need to have a society that is healthy-minded enough to allow us to really pursue all of these ends.
Okay, that's great. So discuss your background and why you think it would render you an effective president of the United States.
Well, as I said, I was a college professor and an educator for a number of years. I've also worked in digital media for quite some time, and I've been a domestic policy analyst and doing some other freelance work and some video editing services and other kinds of things. Life of a freelancer and a college professor, for that matter, in the United States is sometimes cobbling together various revenue streams. And so that is the reality of how I've lived to some degree in my adult life. I would very much benefit from the systems that we're talking about in terms of being able to and advance my own businesses. But yes, I do feel that relative to the other candidates in this Transhumanist Party primary, which ends in the second week of August. We're having our voting closes on July 31st, or rather voting registration closes on July 31st. So please, in the next few weeks, sign up, irrespective of who you might be voting for. Please do sign up if you're a U.S. resident. And we also have members within our party who are not specifically U.S. residents. We have some rights that are afforded internationally as well, not necessarily the full voting rights, but so please do sign up. And of the three candidates in this race, I would say that I have the most experience in terms of a domestic policy and work of this kind. The candidate like Rachel Haywire, she has a lot of ideas about political philosophy in the abstract, but I don't think she really lives or dies for reform and public policy in the way that I do, in the way that maybe somebody like Charles Holsopple does. That does make a difference. And the main idea here is not that BenZion needs to do this or that as a candidate. The main idea here is that we move the ball as far down the field as we can for humane economic policy reforms in the United States. Advance the discussion of a minimum income, a basic income. Advance the discussion of e-governance, starting with blockchain voting. advance a discussion of public health objectives being met through a universal healthcare system. And that is something that I think our platform is doing to a great degree, and will increasingly be doing in the coming months.
What do you consider to be the most important aspects of transhumanism, and what kinds of impacts should this have upon the world?
Transhumanists are a diverse group. You might almost say that there's a proliferation of tongues there. Sometimes in just talking about public policy matters with someone like Rachel Haywire, for example, we might start to veer off into subjects that do not necessarily relate to present-day realities for people living in the United States, or policy realities of today. And this proliferation of tongues, I think, is it's a little bit of a thing that we have to be careful about. But I do think that techno-optimists are very much united by one particular idea, which is the idea of public health and life extensionism in general. This is the one thing that tends to poll pretty high among transhumanists compared to approaches to advanced algorithms, the other notions. There's a little more diversity within those ideas. But as far as life extension is concerned, that is the thing that tends to separate techno-optimists from the population at large. A strong interest in life extension, and but it's also, there are people who are very influential people in the Transhumanist Party and in transhumanist circles who think who question whether we need to have policy mandates and discussions of this kind. Now, I talked about my mother. My mother is somebody who is this kind of de facto life extensionist. She goes to the doctor. She agrees to these new interventions as they are available. She's not a staunch life extensionist, but she is, in fact, among the overwhelming number of people who would tend to accept these technologies as they become available. But I think it's important to increase the pace in which those things are available to her and to others in their through their public health services and through other channels. That is, I think, should be the role of the Transhumanist Party. And to the extent that we make the role of the Transhumanist Party talking about far future issues, I believe we do it at our own peril.
What are the areas of the US Transhumanist Party platform, the platform that you identify most strongly with?
Yes. Well, there's, I've already described at some length the three main points of the Futurist New Deal: a middle-class basic income funded through federal land leases, a blockchain voting system, which would also be, in the long term, far cheaper and more easily administrated. These smartphone devices are already basically in everyone's hands. In the United States, there's a program called Lifeline that provides smartphones to low-income people who do not have them. So there would not be additional technological infrastructure aside from apps that would have to, and these protocols that would have to be developed within the blockchain system. But the physical technology is already in people's hands. So this would save money in the long term, and it would certainly save a tremendous amount of money when you consider how much moneyed special interests and lobbies are able to micromanage the systems in the present day. These people in the United States who talk about blockchain voting as being bad because it would open the door for hackers, that's not the situation in the United States. Hackers are not damaging our democracy. Special interests and oligarchs are damaging our democracy. Party bosses who will just burn the ballot box to get their candidate in are damaging our democracy. and that's a serious problem. We have the ability to these hacks will continue. They have always continued in the history of the networked world. We'll continue to fight them off, but that's really not the thing that's damaging the United States on the domestic front. It is these other things, and if we build this transparency into that system, we are creating a system that is more of a direct democracy that is allowing people to actually have their votes being reflected in the system as opposed to nullified in various ways. And so these two things, in addition, a robust public health service beyond what exists in the United States, effectively universal health care is an absolute must. It would be the thing that I would be working just as hard for on day one in January of 2021 as a basic income. But there's other areas in e-governance and more advanced technocracy notions that are close to my heart. These might not be things for January 2021, but they're things that I would like to discuss in advance. The previous presidential candidate from the Transhumanist Party and the founder of our party, his name is Zoltan Istvan. I think we've referred to him a little bit in this interview already. He's written a number of articles, as have others, about the idea of a more algorithm-driven technocracy. In fact, he's written articles with the title, Can a Computer Become the President? Which might sound like a rather glib thing to say, but in point of fact, when you're describing a system of this kind, what you are describing is one that is perhaps arranged a little differently, but still with the same kind of oversights and people in the loop, but one that is allowing for automation and advanced algorithms to be used to the fullest extent to make our society basically running more efficiently and using its limited resources to a far greater extent. And that's something ultimately like algocracy or algorithm-driven technocracy is something that is close to my heart. And that is a value that some transhumanists in our party do share. But that is a longer range consideration, to be sure.
It's a very interesting point. I don't want to comment too much because I don't want to do anything for the other candidate, like say too much to put off the other candidates. So I'll keep my thoughts to myself on this one. What are, in your view, some of the major problems in contemporary American society? How can transhumanism aid in resolving those problems?
Yes. Well, the United States, for many, many decades, was a leader in its middle class, and as a result, a leader in its life expectancy and health outcomes. Those numbers have fallen off, and it's not a coincidence that they've fallen off at the same time. Life expectancy as well as the health of the middle class, and today in the United States, something like 60% of people who are employed are working in service jobs, which are tending to have artificially low wages, and they also at the same time are living in apartments or housing where these costs are kept artificially high. And so this has effectively created a slave system in the United States. So when the current president is bragging about how wonderful it is that we have near full employment, 97% employment, it's not taking into account that an overwhelming number of these people are not earning a living wage and are effectively living with these systems. If you compare that to the time when the United States middle class and public health outcomes did thrive relative to the rest of the world, that was a time when labor unions were far more influential in the United States, and when the majority of workers were working in factories and making what would have been adjusting for inflation something like $30 an hour or more on average. compared to these artificially low wages of today. So this is a serious problem, and it's not just an oversight on the part of legislators. It's a trend that's going back to the 70s, throughout the Reagan administration, with tax cuts for the wealthy, and basically a system that is socialism for the rich and dog eat dog capitalism for working people, not legislating to protect the middle class. That is the most serious problem, and that, in my view, is the area in which the Transhumanist Party many transhumanists have tended to ignore this set of concerns. And in this particular reform-minded climate, to do so is to cast your organization as an organization of people whose head is in the clouds, who may be elitists, and that's a mistake that we should not make.
In your view, what aspects of contemporary American politics works well, and what aspects of contemporary American politics are broken and or malfunctioning?
Moving from the civil society to the political systems more specifically, but in that conversation, I would say it's much the same effects, but those effects being derived from the use of dark money, the use of the influence that lobbies have over. There's an organization that's actually mentioned in a list that you might have been looking at when we were discussing the points of the Futurist New Deal. This organization is called ALEC, and ALEC is a right-wing law writing body that feeds legislation to Republicans, and so Republicans don't have to write laws. Right? Great news for them. They can focus on just being media personalities. But the net result of this is that laws are being written by corporations rather than by any public servant who has the public's interest at heart. And this general principle has been one that we've moved towards. It's the main reason why these outside watchdogs look at the United States and say, sorry, pal, that's not actually really a democracy anymore. It's an oligarchy, because of these overall tendencies. And, you see this in the Supreme Court in recent years, the U.S. Supreme Court as well. So it's really something that we have to stop. We have to stop it in no uncertain terms, and we have to do that by taking on these entrenched interests that have managed to insinuate themselves into this two-party system. And you can almost describe this as a three-party system. There's the Republicans, and to a lesser extent the Democrats, but very much so also the Democrats in terms of this level of corruption. And then there's the third party would be the Charles Koch network, this organization that created ALEC, this organization that created the Citizens United Supreme Court decision that allows corporations to have an undue influence and be regarded as persons. A lot of these things are coming from this one particular set of people who have basically imposed minority rule upon the United States towards these corporatist ends. And then, the two parties tend to want to talk about only a limited number of issues. The Democrats cast themselves as the liberal party, but in fact, their liberal talking points are ideas that are not necessarily closely tied to economic outcomes. So we have a vigorous discussion along a narrow range of issues about border security, about gun control, about fertility medicine. These are important issues, but they're not issues that are discussing people's primary concerns about the economy. And then it's a form of misdirection. And then these oligarchs, these people in the Charles Koch sphere of influence, are able to create these economic policies that hurt us, and we're all concerned with the sideshow. And so it's something that has to stop. and we have to take measures beyond just implementing a new safety net programs. We have to take a stand as a society and elect a new class of legislators and make these things illegal again as they used to be. Before 1974, it was illegal to run for-profit healthcare in the United States. The idea was this would have been seemed a sick joke to people of the time, and now we accept it, just in the way that we've accepted all of these corporatist influences and corporatist creep over the decades on our system. And now we say, well, this must have been how it always was. It was not always like this, and we can go back to that to the way that it was when things were properly legislated and capitalism was able to exist in a regulated and healthful form.
If elected President of the United States, what policy measures would you pursue?
Yes. I would be implementing these particular issues described in the Futurist New Deal. I have many other policy positions, primarily, not everything would be towards greater regulation. Some things, the Trump administration is not uniformly a boogeyman, in my view. There's some things for transhumanists that have been somewhat good. The right to try in medicine. This is a good thing. This certain kinds of deregulation are good for people, and we have to find a balance there. There's any number of issues of this kind. I have. Did you have any other specific issue that we hadn't touched upon that you think that we should address?
Is aging a disease?
Okay. I do think that aging should be viewed in these terms. I don't think that we should do it to castigate elderly people. I think there's a need for sensitivity there. But I think that, yes, aging is a disease, and it is one that we can increasingly describe as something that we can avoid if we don't have the courage of our convictions to describe it in those terms. It will tend to prevent us from achieving a universal longevity escape velocity, which I think would be a terrible thing. It would put us on the wrong side of history if these emerging technologies were to fall into our laps and we as a society did not have the political will to see them benefited from the most.
When you're the President of the United States, you have to deal with bureaucracy. And the deep state is something that you've talked about at length. How do you define it? I define it as a collection of decision-making bodies within the government whose long-term policies are unaffected by long-term changes at a national level. They're a permanent body. The popular influence has over the group as a guaranteed civil service protection rights. So just quickly, deep state, is it a real thing? Is it bureaucracy? And how would you deal with it?
Yeah, well, I think we should say that many people who use this term in the United States are engaging in a kind of apologism for the current administration, which promised to drain the swamp and in fact is the swamp. So that should be said. But this concept of a deep state describing these imperialist and oligarchic forces, this imperialist and oligarchic creep, this nullification of the will of direct democracy, this is a real thing. And it's unfortunately one of the most real things in the United States government. We shouldn't just disregard this term. The term deep state does refer to a specific set of back channels that would have existed not in North America, but rather in more planned economies in the old world. The term has been repurposed to describe various different concerns. But I think that in describing the ways in which oligarchs are subverting the will of the people and subverting public good and public health, this sort of terminology is very apt, and we should use it. But unfortunately, is a little bit of a weasel word, quote unquote, a word that's being used in an imprecise and an inflammatory way.
Just before we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to say to either the candidates or any of the transhumanists who are watching, or public at large, anyone, any final wrap-up campaign slogan, where you can find you, all of that other good stuff?
Yes. Well, my competitor, Rachel Haywire, has taken some pictures with Andrew Yang. She went to an Andrew Yang event and took some pictures there. And Andrew Yang was the first candidate in this race, in the U.S. presidential race. And I've been following his campaign very closely from that moment. He actually, for someone who is not a career politician, he had from the first moment an incredibly well fleshed out policy platform. Clearly done his research in support of this UBI and these other reforms that he supports. The function, I think, of the Transhumanist Party, this is fundamentally a public policy advocacy organization. And so we do want to raise awareness for this set of issues surrounding techno-progress and surrounding economic reforms that would lead to greater techno-progress. And but I would encourage people to support us by signing up and for membership with the Transhumanist Party, and also for supporting me in that second week of August, voting for me, Johannon BenZion, and the Futurist New Deal in that e-vote. It's a week-long e-vote in the second week of August, and but also to consider that that we need to all be building coalitions towards reform and towards more direct democracy, and towards preparing for things like the jobless future. And that's only those truck drivers having their jobs automated out of existence right now. That's a large number of people in the United States. Those workers in grocery stores and service workers having their jobs automated away right now. That's a large number of people in the United States. Other candidates don't have a plan to deal with this increasing unemployment, and we do. But we need to also be working with other people who have these goals at heart in the long term, and combining our efforts as well there. So please consider the Futurist New Deal, and consider that we should frame all of these debates around the idea of a basic income. That is the thing that will move us forward truly into the 21st century.
That's a beautiful summary. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Jonathan BenZion. If you could just...
You can just call me Ben. Johan, but you can just call me Ben.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you could just mute me, because I might just go on now.
For you, yes.
That's fine. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. You're candidate number 1 of 3, so we'll have the other 2 coming on. Especially, it sounds like Rachel Haywire's got a fight on her hands. It's going to be a big showdown. It's good. You're all sort of working in concert, because we all know how this is like you said, it's advocacy more than anything, and it's trying to get it out to the public and trying to say, hey, we're here. So yeah, that's understood. Your Futurist New Deal is very exciting. There's lots of interesting points. Some people will disagree with a lot of that. Some people will have some problems with it. Some people won't understand it, so that's okay as well. And look, and all the best with your presidential candidacy campaign. We wish you well. And remember that you can come back on Detonation anytime you want to update us with any of the campaign news or anything that's going on, or talk or complain, or you can use this platform anytime you want. So that would be really good to see you again on in the future. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for taking time out. So that's fantastic. So that's Detonation, the Unshackled.net. More Detonation coming your way. Is there anything you'd like to say right now, or that's it?
No. Thank you again, Steele, for having me. And I would like to come back. I really did enjoy speaking with you. And I will definitely be coming back as we have updates or new campaign information. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Johann BenZion, thank you very much.